Ian Lesser from GMF here in Brussels, and thanks to all of you for joining us today for this virtual conversation with Ambassador Professor Ibrahim Kalin, Chief Advisor and spokesperson for President Erdoğan of Turkey. Ambassador, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking time from a busy schedule. I know you joined us from Baku today, and we're really looking forward to this conversation. You're someone who's been at the center of Turkish foreign policy making for many years, and a key interlocutor for international policymakers as well. A lot is going on in Turkey, around Turkey, in the international system. We'll get to talk about that. Just to give you a little bit of a roadmap of what we're going to do today, we have an hour for our conversation. The ambassadors kindly agreed to take questions, so we'll reserve some time in the end for that. The conversation is on the record. And let me just mention at the outset that we're very, very appreciative to be able to hold this conversation in the context of our partnership between GMF and the Union of Chambers and Commodity Exchanges of Turkey, TOBB. So let's just get right down to the conversation. And Ibrahim, if I may, start with something big picture. Maybe to tell us a little bit about your thinking of how you're thinking about Turkey in sort of grand strategic terms. What are the big animating ideas in Turkish foreign policy as you see them today? How would you situate us in that big picture?
Thank you, Ian.
Again, many, many thanks, and over to you.
My pleasure. It's very good to see you, and thank you and the GMF for your kind invitation. I'm happy to be part of this conversation. A lot is changing in the international order. That's obvious. But what is changing, I think needs our attention. What we are experiencing right now is the emergence of a multipolar world, but we don't know what those different poles are, which direction they will be going. There is a growing gap between different worlds, east, west, south, north, poor and rich, etc. Even though the COVID-19 pandemic, I think, has broken down many of the barriers that we thought existed between different parts of the world. And in that sense, we are living for the first time, I believe, in modern history, a truly global moment where one event has touched every single life on Earth. We've had cases of political crises or civil wars or economic crises that affected parts of the world, but never had the kind of global impact that COVID-19 has been having for the last 8 months or so. And it looks like we will be living through this truly global moment for some time to come. The reason I mention this is that I think this pandemic and the challenges that it presented gave us time to think or opportunity to think about or rethink our priorities in the new setting in which we find ourselves. Maybe we'll come back to that later. One of the consequences of what's been happening over the last couple of decades is the rise of shifting alliances and the weakening of old alliances and kind of the reemergence of new regional alliances with global implications. For example, Western Alliance is still seeking a proper place for itself in this new order or global scene. When you look at how NATO is functioning, how EU is defining itself, how the US is relating itself to the rest of the world, all this set of issues have an impact on how Turkey also conducts its foreign policy and how it sees or situates itself in this very dynamic, multidimensional, multipolar search for a new order. Now, Voltaire was once asked about the Holy Roman Empire, and he said it was neither holy nor Roman nor empire. And I think the global liberal order that we're talking about kind of fits that description. It's neither global nor liberal nor an order, as we have seen over the last couple of decades. It has created so many challenges and problems that I think we need to take up some of these challenges. Now, as far as Turkey's approach to foreign policy is concerned, first of all, Turkey is part of the Western Alliance with a lot of outreach to other parts of the world. We have been part of the Western Alliance, NATO, and the Transatlantic Alliance for more than half a century. In fact, our whole history of the founding of the Republic and Turkish modernization has been part of this attempt to make Turkey part of the Western Alliance with different degrees of success and failure and joy as well as disappointment in different periods of this long history. But Turkey has always had this outreach to other parts of the world, to the Caucasus, has always had a very unique relationship with Russia, has always had an eye on Africa. North Africa has been, in a sense, part of Middle East. And the Turkish world, the larger Turkish world, extending from Azerbaijan, where I'm joining you today, all the way to the Chinese border, to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan, and that part of the Turkish world, as well as Latin America. Now, when you look at Turkey's position, how we've been trying to take advantage of this unique position for Turkey. Number one is that we are part of the alliance, but we know also that alliances need to be strong enough to stay focused, but also dynamic and flexible enough to address new challenges. You're part of the Western Alliance, Transatlantic Alliance. It doesn't mean that you cannot have serious engagement in Africa, Middle East, or the Caucasus. First of all, this is something that our geography imposes on us, so we cannot run away from it. But more importantly, I think it's given the global nature of international relations, economic interests, and national interests, and other things. All countries, in fact, do have engagements in other parts of the world. One particular or unique aspect of this debate is the fact that when some other countries, such as say UK or France or the United States, have engagements outside the Western world, say in Middle East and Lebanon, in Syria, say in North Africa or other parts of the world, no one criticizes this kind of engagements. But when Turkey begins to develop its relationship, say either with the Gulf or with Middle East or North Africa or Africa proper, then there is always this debate that Turkey is moving away from the West, it's losing its access, changing its outlook, betraying the Western alliance, and so on and so forth. First of all, factually, this is not true because we don't see foreign policy as a zero-sum game. The fact that we are part of NATO, we want to join the EU as a full member, and we want to remain a strong partner and ally in the Western alliance doesn't mean that we cannot have good relations with countries in the Middle East or with Russia, or with China, Asia, or other parts of the world. I think this is a very narrow Eurocentric perspective that we need to overcome. Other countries have engagements. If they're constructive, if they serve their national interests, I think this is fine. We don't have any problem with that. Of course, we need to coordinate. But the fact that Turkey is present, say, politically and even militarily in the fight against terrorism in Syria should not be, a concern for our Western allies. To the contrary, it should be seen as something supporting the international coalition in the fight against Daesh. The differences over PYD, YPG need to be discussed, negotiated, and why we are opposing, for example, the US support for PYD, YPG needs to be understood in its proper context. But it doesn't necessarily mean that, we question the very basis of this alliance. To the contrary, we try to explain our position and help as much as we can in this joint effort, on specific issues such as the fight against Daesh, terrorism, or working together for migration and hosting, immigrants from Syria, from Iraq, from other parts of the world where Turkey, is, I think, rightly praised for its remarkable work. And our President Erdoğan, has been really at the forefront of protecting, millions of refugees in Turkey, as well as on the Syrian side, as well as in Iraq, and from Afghanistan and other parts of the world. Therefore, we don't see this as a zero-sum game. There are issues that require our engagement and presence, so we do this in coordination with other allies. But as far as our own national security is concerned, of course, we have to act decisively. If a strategic ally is supporting a branch of the PKK in Syria or in Iraq, of course, we have to oppose it. How can we, agree to that kind of a policy, which we believe has been misconstrued from the very beginning, from the Obama presidency? But as I said, the alliances need to be strong enough to keep its focus, but also dynamic and flexible enough to deal with these different challenges in different parts of the world. Could be Africa or Eastern Mediterranean or the Caucasus or other places. We are trying to advance a mutually empowering relationship between our country, Turkey, and other allies, as well as other countries. When I say mutually empowering, it's another way of saying, to create win-win situation. But really, we want to have relationships based on equality, respect, fairness, so that we all benefit from this. Our president, for example, has been very outspoken, as you know, in his criticism of the international system. For example, the UN system. He says the world is bigger than five. The UN Security Council system needs a serious reform. You know, other countries need to be represented there. All of this, at the end of the day, is a call for equality and fairness. And we are not asking for favors from other countries. All we are asking is to treat everyone as equal partners. You might have a bigger army than mine, you may have a bigger economy than mine, but when it comes to the basic fundamentals of conducting relations between countries, that needs to be based on equality, on equal partnership, right? The old political cultural hierarchies of the 19th century, the Eurocentric concepts of global order, that period is over. I think I believe, and I've said this and I've written about this, that Eurocentrism, to the extent to which it exists, hurts even Western interests because it creates a sense of alienation. It creates sense of a mastership, which every country, every policymaker with a sound mind will reject clearly. What we need is a proper reading of the new dynamics of this new world scene, global scene that we are all trying to understand, but also shape in different ways. In that regard, we also believe that it is a self-defeating strategy to define one's national interest in a too narrow and maximalist way. When you define your national interest in such narrow way or ways, you end up alienating many other partners, and it doesn't produce mutually empowering relationships. And then, of course, that leads to reactions, that leads to confrontation, collusion. Differences become serious issues. How you define your national interest, of course, is a big issue conceptually as well as politically. You know, when you define this or you discuss this intellectually, conceptually, there are a number of issues that require attention, but also most of the time you do this in practice, you do this on the go, right? When you are on the side of the policy making of things, then you want to define your national policy, national interest in such a way that it helps others as well. It doesn't become an absolutely exclusivist definition of national interest, so that others. For example, security. If I define my national interest as absolute security for myself only, with total disregard to the national security concern of others, then I end up basically building up walls around myself. But in this world in which everything has become so transactional, everything has become so intertwined globally, as we have seen through this pandemic and other migration crisis, the fight against terrorism, other global challenges, I in fact lose a lot in my own effort to protect my national interest. Therefore, we say that none of us is safe until all of us are safe from a security point of view. So if you're going to fight against terrorism, we have to fight against all forms of terrorism. We cannot pick and choose and say certain forms of terrorism are okay. Al-Qaeda and Daesh are bad, but PKK terrorism is Turkey's problem because Al-Qaeda and Daesh attack Western interests, so it should be a global problem, a global threat. But PKK attacks only Turkey, so it should be Turkey's problem. That kind of approach is misguided. If you are going to fight against this form of terrorism, we have to fight against all of it so that, I feel safe, Europe feels safe, Middle Eastern countries feel safe, Gulf countries feel safe, and all of us, join forces in this fight. Therefore, narrow definitions of national security, can be an impediment rather than an empowering element in our engagement with global issues. One last point about all this is that we conduct also a humanitarian policy vis-a-vis the refugees as well as in other areas. I mentioned this because it's not because it is less an important issue, and sometimes people think of this humanitarian diplomacy as something soft, something we can all agree upon. But seriously, we are talking about human lives. We are talking about real human beings. What is the meaning of all this? You know, international relations, global politics, state structures and institutions and all of that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, they are there to serve human beings, to protect human dignity. Tomorrow is the International Human Rights Day, and it will be the, I think, 72nd anniversary of the Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Uh, we are all doing this to protect human dignity and allow people to have a decent life, equal opportunity, uh, and give them a sense that they are entitled to a safe, secure, prosperous, decent life, just like anyone else, whether that person is from Somalia or Japan or the United States, that we all treat all human beings as equal. Now, we say these things, but our practice points in different direction. The system produces so much inhuman and inhumane practices and networks of relations that all this loses its meaning. Therefore, when I say humanitarian diplomacy, I don't simply mean that, you know, we are number one in the world in terms of hosting refugees. Yes, that's a fact, it's there, but I don't want to brag about it. What I would like to do, what we should be doing, is really to put the human person, human life, as number one priority before anything else. And once we do this, and we do this with total disregard to the religion, to the skin color, to the ethnic origin, to the geography of that human person, then I think we achieve something. This remains one of the deep crises of the current global order. You know, we forget the human person, we forget real human life. So they become just numbers and statistics. When you look at the Syrian file, how many Syrians have died, how many refugees are out there, you see they lose their humanity. They just become numbers, and I believe that's a problem from an ethical, moral point of view, as well as from a political and economic point of view. So we try our best in you know to advance humanitarian diplomacy in any part of the world, whether it's in Syria or Iraq or Myanmar or Somalia or whatever it is. You know, we have to, I think, join forces in that area, and that requires sometimes, of course, a joining of hard and soft power. The fight against terrorism cannot be given by only either hard power or soft power. It requires some kind of a combination. Security arrangements certainly involve an intelligent, smart combination of hard and soft power. So we are trying, you know, our best to do this in Syria, in Iraq, in the fight against terrorism, but also in other parts of the world. Again, to be open and honest about this, in Libya, we were invited by the Libyan government, the legitimate Libyan government recognized by the UN, in Tripoli to help them against the military advances and occupation attempts by Haftar and his forces last year. And we agreed to it. And our decision to partner with the Libyan government there brought a degree of balance to the Libyan conflict. And thanks to that, now they are in the political process. The fighting has stopped, which is very good. And the Libyan political dialogue has been going on for some time now, for the last couple of months, which we support fully under the UN as well as within the Berlin parameters. Our president attended the Berlin conference to find a political solution to the Libyan conflict, and we fully support it. But we knew then and we know now that it required, you know, strong standing on the ground to push back, you know, Haftar advances, to bring a degree of balance to that conflict. But again, we all do this to give a chance to diplomacy so that, you know, hopefully final outcome will be at the negotiating table rather than on the battlefield. Therefore, you know, when you look at the kind of the overall structure of this, how we conduct our relationship, you know, vis-a-vis our traditional allies, United States, EU, individual European countries, countries in the Balkans, in Southern Europe, as well as in other parts of the world, we try to implement some of this policies in a constantly changing world where I think we're all looking for some degree of balance, equilibrium, sustainability for all of us. So,
Ibrahim, thank you, Ibrahim Bey. That was really an incredible tour d'horizon, and really, you know, very insightful. Gave us a lot to think about. Whether we agree with all of it or not, it gives us a wonderful window into your thinking, and there's much that we would agree with for sure, all of us. Let me ask you something which is rather on a different tack. I mean, this is going to be an important week. Actually, here in Brussels, it's going to be an important next 2 days. There's a critical EU Council meeting tomorrow and on Friday. Turkey, relations with Turkey are on the agenda. There's the very real prospect of sanctions, or at a minimum, a kind of setting of new red lines with regard to the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean in particular. What are you expecting, and how would you react?
First of all, I read earlier today the draft EU summit statement about Turkey, and it's disappointing to see this language of sanctions being considered for the summit tomorrow about Turkey. And I hope that the European leaders, EU leaders, will avoid, that language of sanctions and threats against Turkey, because look, sanctions will never work. They never worked. They will have the reverse effect. We want to have a positive agenda. We want to turn a new page with EU. We want to advance our EU membership. As our president has been saying over the last month or so, that we see Turkey's future place within the EU perspective. And we believe that our larger geopolitical, geostrategic agenda should not be hijacked by a very narrow agenda and maximalist demands of individual member countries. Yes, we do have differences with some countries over certain issues, but they should not dominate, they should not define the very parameters of our relationship with EU. I understand the sense of solidarity and unity, and EU is a very difficult mechanism structure to function within. I fully understand that. But to surrender to the very narrow agenda of one or two members, will hurt, I believe, EU interests in the long run. Look, when you look at Turkey-EU relationship in a larger scheme of things, we have so much to cooperate and to work with, from regional crises such as Syria, stability in Iraq, and the Caucasus, the most recent one. And hopefully, this is no longer a crisis. It's been in the process of being resolved. The Karabakh issue in Southern Caucasus, to other issues such as the fight against terrorism, the migration crisis, economic relations, energy security in the Eastern Mediterranean, so many other issues there. And we will be, I think, doing a disservice to our own national interests, national perspectives, countries, and to our own people if we narrow and reduce this larger picture, vitally important relationship, to the narrow agenda of one or two member countries. I mean, you all know what I'm referring to. I'll be happy to expound on this, but I think it's clear enough, self-evident. Sure. Sanctions will not work. As I said, it will produce the reverse effect in the long run. Everybody will lose at the end of the day. It's not in anybody's interest to see Turkey and the EU having this kind of tensions or confrontation, say, over the issue of exploration activities in the Eastern Mediterranean, or about Cyprus. Those who know the history of these issues, I think, will admit and recognize that we have been so patient, we've been so constructive. For example, in regards to the Cyprus process, in 2004 and just before that, our president spent so much time and political capital for the unification of the island within the UN parameters, Remember what happened with the Annan Plan in 2004? It was the Greek Cypriot side that rejected the Annan Plan in the referendum. It was the Turkish Cypriot side that accepted the Annan Plan. And after that, something rather mind-boggling happened. And the Greek Cypriot side of the island, which rejected the UN plan, was accepted as a full member into EU. And EU violated a fundamental principle of its own. That is, that you don't accept a member country into the union if that country has a territorial dispute with another country. They made that mistake under pressure from number of, again, member countries. But now they want us to act as if this didn't happen. This happened 16 years ago in 2004. We've been so patient during this time. Again, we participated in all of the UN talks and processes and negotiations, most recently in Crans-Montana in 2017, 3 years ago. You can ask the EU officials, who did what, who promised what, and who broke their promise in those negotiations. And again, some members, some EU officials are coming back to us and saying that you have to accept the Greek Cypriot terms. Why should we? We work very hard for the unification of the island, but unfortunately, the Greek Cypriot side never accepted the Turkish side as equals. And every Greek political leader over the last 2 decades, not to speak of earlier times, said that they are not in a position to advocate a solution that will treat the Greeks and the Turks on the island as equal. This is the bottom line of the problem. All other issues, whether Turkey goes to Varosha or do this, do that, these are all minor issues. Believe me, they are just the side effects of this problem, which is the Greek refusal to recognize the Turks on the island as equals. So just one example. I think we want to make progress on all of these issues. We are not the ones running away from the negotiating table. On the Eastern Mediterranean, again, I've been involved in this talks and negotiations with my Greek counterpart, with our German counterpart as facilitator, and the Germans have played a remarkably positive role, been very constructive, and we were hoping that we will reach a resolution and resume exploratory talks with Greece. Oruç Reis's ship has been pulled back to Antalya port about 10 days ago, 11 days ago. And we were hoping that we will resume the talks right after that, because they said that this is the condition. Well, Oruç Reis finished its work and they said, okay, we can start. Now, unfortunately, our Greek friends are saying that no, they will not even consider talking to Turkey until after the EU summit, which makes me think that they want to have some kind of a sanction from the EU summit. And believe me, that will be detrimental to not only Turkey-EU relations, but also Turkish-Greek relations. And you may have seen statements by the Greek foreign minister about Turkey, claiming that Turkey has become a threat, not only to EU or Greece, to the entire Mediterranean and Middle East and all of that. That kind of rhetoric doesn't take us anywhere. Whatever bilateral issues we have with some individual countries, member countries, we should solve them. EU can help, but as I said, if the EU agenda is reduced and hijacked by this very narrow agenda, then everybody will lose at the end of the day.
Ambassador, let me ask you about another aspect of this crisis, if you want to describe it that way. Leaving aside the sort of merits of the legal and political arguments and all of these things which we've been discussing, there are a lot of forces operating in proximity. And of course, it's not just Greece and Turkey. There are many others operating in the Eastern Mediterranean. How concerned are you about simply the risk of something going wrong, of miscalculation, of an accident, of a misperception, of things getting out of control? And what is your feeling about any of the steps that have been taken so far by NATO or others to try to reduce those risks? Well, is it working?
Yeah, we have been very forthcoming and constructive in the NATO meetings about deconflicting military activities between Turkish and Greek navies there. And if you remember, about a month and a half ago, The NATO Secretary General made a statement and said there are talks going on and it will be constructive, and then it was rejected by the Greek side, and that put the NATO Secretary General in a very awkward situation, after all these negotiations. But now we have a mechanism in place. We are hoping that this will continue to work so that we avoid any kind of confrontation. We don't want any kind of military or political confrontation with any country in the Eastern Mediterranean, with Greece or with other countries. Despite our political differences with some members around the Eastern Mediterranean, our president has called for a comprehensive Eastern Mediterranean energy and gas conference, where everybody will be part of the conversation, will be around the table to think in creative terms and to consider how we can turn Eastern Mediterranean energy resources into something that will be of benefit to everyone. Again, to be perfectly clear, we have our own political differences with Egypt, with Israel on a number of other issues, but on this particular issue, on Eastern Mediterranean conference, we've said, we are ready to talk to everyone without any preconditions. And this idea was supported by President Michel, von der Leyen, Chancellor Merkel, and others. And the work is actually still underway. We are hoping at some point this conference will convene to address all these issues. So I'm not that pessimistic about that, but how much price we're going to have to pay to get there remains a question.
Ambassador, and I'm conscious of our time. It's a fascinating conversation. There's so many things we could talk about, but I do absolutely want to get to the question of U.S.-Turkish relations with the incoming Biden administration. U.S.-Turkish relations, I think you'll agree, have never been easy to manage. We are sometimes maybe more similar than we're prepared to admit when it comes to many things, not including our own feelings about sovereignty and security consciousness and other things. But it's always been a tough relationship to manage. It's been particularly tough in recent years. And in very recent years, the S-400 purchase, but a list of other things as well on both sides, has been at the heart of this, what I would say is mutual suspicion. How do we get out of this? What are you expecting from the Biden administration? After all, there's every reason to think that they could take quite a tough line on many of these issues. The new defense appropriation that's just come out actually forces the hand of this sitting president and the next president in terms of imposing sanctions on Turkey over the S-400 issue. Again, what are you expecting and what's your approach?
Well, President-elect Biden knows Turkey. He came to Turkey a number of times, I believe 4 times when he was vice president under President Obama. He knows our president personally. He knows the political actors and the political scene in Turkey. And I believe he and his team appreciate Turkey's geopolitical and strategic value, in terms of U.S.-Turkish relations, but also on a larger scale of global politics. Now, we believe that we can have a very good positive agenda with the Biden administration, despite the issues that you mentioned. Yes, these are issues that we have to deal with. S-400 is, in our view, a result, not the cause, of a number of problems that developed over years. Number one, our repeated request to purchase Patriot defense system, which was turned down, unfortunately, because we were not able to agree on the terms. And about 4 or 5 years ago, actually about 6 years ago, when our president said, look, we are NATO allies, we are strategic partners, and you are still refusing to give me, to sell me with our own money, the Patriot missile defense system, then I'm going to have to look for some alternatives. They thought that he was bluffing. When things got very serious, they realized that they made a mistake, but it was too late. And we still believe that we can address this issue. That is, that if the concern is to maintain the security and safety of the F-35 program, once they are here in Turkey and once the S-400 is there, we believe that from a technical military point of view, that issue can be addressed. But we also know that it's no longer a technical military issue. It was conceived by the Congress as a political issue for having close defense industry relations with Russia. But penalizing Turkey for that will be so counterproductive that it will hurt Turkish-US relations, but also it will not, again, do any good. It will have the reverse effect. Let me just be very open here. Turkey is being criticized for having good relations with Russia, but there are many issues over which we do not agree with Russia. We don't agree with Russia over the Assad regime in Syria. We don't agree with Russia about Haftar in Libya. And we didn't agree actually with the Russian support or position in regards to the Armenian position on Karabakh. But we have a working relationship where we're trying to address all these issues. Most recently, let me give you an example from the Karabakh conflict. That conflict has been there for the last 3 decades. The Minsk group has failed to produce any concrete results or come up with proposals that will resolve this conflict. And the Azeris have lived through this disappointment and the sense of being lied to for 3 decades. So they've been frustrated with the Russians, they've been frustrated with the Americans, with the French, across the board. It's not a narrow political perspective. It's not like being pro-Western or anti-Western, pro-Russian. For the Azeris themselves, their land has been under occupation for more than 3 decades. And the Minsk group has done practically almost nothing to resolve this issue. Now the issue has been resolved. Now I ask one simple question to my colleagues who sometimes accuse us of doing another deal with Russia rather than with our Western allies. Over the last 10 years, over the last year, and over the last 4 months, since this last phase of this Karabakh conflict began, was there a single proposal by the US, by France, or any other Western ally which we didn't support? Was there any initiative that will have led to the ending of this conflict which we did not support? When the Americans invited the Azeri and Armenian foreign ministers to Washington, and they announced a ceasefire, my good friend Robert O'Brien called me and he said, could you support this initiative? I said immediately. And within hours, we had an issue, we had a statement issued out there in support of the US call for a ceasefire. It lasted only a day. The next day, the Armenians began fighting again. So the fighting continued. France actually never produced anything concrete, palpable, anything actionable. They made a lot of political statements, but in terms of addressing the real issue, they never did anything. So when the Russians said, look, we want to end this conflict, and these are the terms, we negotiated very hard. The Azeris negotiated very hard. But now, if you ask me, our Western allies and friends should see the presence of Turkish military as part of the monitoring group in Karabakh, in Azerbaijan, as an asset. If they ask this question, well, the Russians will be there for the next 5+5 years. Well, let's remember history. The Russians have been here in this part of the world for more than 100 years. If they're really so concerned about the Russian military presence, they can go and ask Armenian government to end the presence of Russian military bases in Armenia. So my point is that, for example, about this Russia issue, the Congress's point of view has been so narrow and one-sided. They're losing the side of the larger picture here. S-400, as I said, is a result, not the cause of this whole process. We still believe that we can resolve this issue with the US. As far as Turkey's expectation from any US government is concerned, there are 2 pressing national security issues for Turkey. Number one is the continuing US support for PYD-YPG in Syria, which we believe is wrong, has been wrong from the very beginning, because everybody knows that PYD-YPG in Syria is PKK in Syria. The US effort to distinguish, to de-link PYD from the PKK, if you ask me, is not a realistic option. They cannot, ontologically speaking, separate themselves from the PKK. They still continue to get their main orders from the Candle Mountains in Iraq, from the PKK leadership. Now, I know they're working on getting non-Syrian PYD, PKKs out of Syria. Okay, but what good will it do? It doesn't solve the problem. So we hope there will be a change in this policy, because in the long run, I believe the US will be stuck with PYD, YPG for a number of reasons in Syria. We talk about territorial integrity of Syria, political unity, etc. And the number two issue is the inaction of successive US governments, Obama presidency, Trump presidency, for one reason or another, about the presence of FETÖ Gülenist networks in the US. And they're responsible for the July 15 coup attempt, and their main ringleaders have been living in the US. But unfortunately, the US governments have done practically nothing to stop these people, extradite them, those who have been sentenced in Turkey. That remains another issue. There are a number of other issues. We have to work together, transatlantic alliance to fight against terrorism, and a number of other economic issues, etc. We believe we can have a good start with the Biden administration if they also see the strategic value of this relationship.
Ambassador, thank you very much. We have a lot of people who've joined us virtually, and we have a lot of questions as a result. I will confess, there's absolutely no way we're going to get to them, all of them, but I do want to save some time for at least some of them. And I've sort of done a little bit of curating here, if you'll forgive me, and I've sort of grouped some of them together. There are a couple of things that stand out in terms of numbers of people asking. On the S-400 question, if I could just follow up on behalf of a number of questioners, under what conditions would Turkey deactivate, send back, change its mind about the S-400 purchase? What would be required?
We have had an agreement with Russia. It's between two sovereign states. We still believe that the presence of S-400s in Turkey does not pose a threat to F-35 jet fighters. Technically, they can be delinked. Technically, the security concerns of the US military or political establishment can be addressed. But the longer this takes, and the more pressure they put on Turkey, and impose sanctions, introduce sanctions, and things like that, the problem will be much more difficult to resolve.
Okay. Number of questions around NATO. The future of NATO. NATO, of course, is going through its own exercise at the moment. It's had the report of the reflection group and other things. One of the points that comes out of that very strongly is trying to create a more political NATO, which is to say a NATO with more of a voice on the big picture strategic issues globally, not just in terms of European security. How do you see that from a Turkish perspective? Good thing, a bad thing?
NATO has been one of the most successful military alliances in recent history, in fact, in history. And we've been part of it, a strong member of NATO, and we have played a key role in more than a dozen NATO missions around the world, and we continue to do so. We have the second largest army in NATO. Our contribution, our defense spending is right where it should be in terms of percentage, and our soldiers are trained within NATO system, and so we are part and parcel of this alliance. We don't see NATO as something of which we are just a part. We are NATO. NATO is us. That this is how we look at it, right? I mean, we are all members of NATO, and we're part of it, and we want to make it function in other areas as well. I agree. I mean, NATO has the huge potential of going beyond just being a military alliance. Political capital that exists in NATO members is huge. The economic potential is huge. And the concept of security has changed from being purely a military concept to human security, to cyber security, to food security, to biological security. all kinds of other security areas. So I think NATO can play a leading role. But just let me also point to a fact that I think should be part of the conversation when we talk about NATO. Over the last couple of years, NATO's relevance, even legitimacy, has been questioned. I'm not talking about those who are suspicious of NATO's mission or NATO critics from other parts of the world. I'm talking about major NATO members. President Trump raised a number of critical questions about NATO, its relevance, and the US role in it. And he said he will no longer pay for the security of Europe and so on and so forth. That whole rhetoric with his establishment, as you know, created a sense of suspicion about NATO, where NATO is going, where it's headed. And then another point was made where President Macron of France said NATO is brain dead. And I know it's a rhetorical question. It was maybe meant to provoke a serious thinking about NATO. But it raised a number of questions about how relevant NATO is. We as Turkey have always emphasized the significance and relevance of NATO for, as you said, not just the security of Europe, but beyond that, because security has become a globally intertwined issue. I believe in a stronger NATO, in a NATO where members talk to one another, cooperate more, coordinate more to address common threats, but also work with a positive agenda as a force for good, as a force for stability in many parts of the world.
If I could add to that, what do you make of this strategic autonomy debate? I mean, it is above all a debate from France, but it's not just in France. I mean, you could argue that Turkey in its own way has pursued something you might describe as strategic autonomy within NATO for some time, but how do you react to this?
I think it's really about coordinating our efforts, understanding each other's national security concerns, our political priorities. The more a conversation we have about this, I believe the more streamlining we will have on all of these issues. Once you are a member of a club, a group, an alliance, there are rules, responsibilities, but also there are advantages to that. Balancing between rights and responsibilities, this is also an issue for NATO. But we believe in a stronger and more united NATO rather than a NATO within which you have so many different divisions or autonomous regions. I think we should all work to make NATO stronger as a whole.
Okay. Ambassador, thank you. There's a question about Turkish-Israeli relations and sort of the conditions under which there could be an improvement. Views on that?
Well, our main criticism of successive Israeli governments has been their treatment of the Palestinians. It's more a regional issue, an issue of justice rather than a bilateral issue. And we still remain committed to the principle of the two-state solution and the protection of the rights of the Palestinian people. Unfortunately, Netanyahu governments have not followed a policy that supports the two-state solution. In fact, Netanyahu himself has said on several occasions that he doesn't believe in the two-state solution. This not only doesn't help the peace process, the two-state solution, but also makes the Palestinian people weaker, more dispossessed, more oppressed. And we will continue to raise this issue because we believe that peace and stability in the Middle East will come only when the Palestinian issue is resolved in terms of fairness, justice, and equality. And the two-state solution is the only way to do it. But when I say the two-state solution, I don't mean something that looks like a state for the Palestinians, but in fact is not. is something that is controlled totally by Israeli security apparatus. No, I mean two-state solution in a serious way. The Palestinians can govern themselves. The Palestinians are entitled to their own freedom and dignity, just like anyone else. You know, and it's not just about Palestinian freedom coming at the expense of Israeli security or vice versa. We have to go beyond this dichotomy. I think peace and security and freedom for all, it is possible, but that requires a responsibility on the part of Israeli governments as well as the U.S. governments, which have traditionally supported the two-state solution.
Ambassador, very different sort of question, and this one's about Brexit. Share your thoughts about Brexit, but also what it might mean as an example for Turkey.
Well,
the implications, I should say, for Turkey.
I think the Brits are sad that we were not able to get into the EU, and we are sad that they're leaving. And we have an interesting conversation with the Brits about this. Was it a wise decision? Well, why are you leaving? And was there something that we should know about? That you are leaving, you decided to leave. But putting the joke aside, I personally would have preferred the UK to stay in the EU. I think it will have made EU a stronger, a more relevant global power. And UK has that potential, has added that value to the EU for many years when it was a member of the EU. But now, of course, the British people have voted, and so we respect that. How that will affect the EU once the Brexit process comes to an end is a question I think we will all be watching very, very closely. Could it set a precedent for other countries to follow suit? I don't know. I hope it doesn't have that impact. If EU is stronger and more united with Turkey in it, I think that will be good for everyone, for the entire region, economically, politically, security-wise, in other areas. But we will continue to have good relations with the UK, no doubt. We have been good partners, good allies. We will maintain that relationship.
Ambassador, let me also take a couple of questions and sort of put them together and reformulate them slightly. Especially in the context of the incoming Biden administration, the President Biden-elect has spoken, and his circle have spoken about a democracy agenda, about possibly convening a summit of democracies. But certainly it's likely to be an administration that pays more attention to issues of democracy, rule of law, media freedom, all of these values, the values side of the relationship. How do you see that from a Turkish perspective? I mean, let's be honest and say, there's a great deal of controversy, and not a little of the debate about Turkey in Europe and the United States has been driven by questions about this. Is there room for improvement here? Is there room for more tension here? How do you see that likely evolving?
Well, I see room for improvement and perhaps better understanding between Turkey and our Western allies about issues of democracy, freedom of speech, and journalism, but also the fight against terrorism. It's not an easy thing to strike a balance between freedom and security. I don't think it's an easy challenge for any country. All countries face it in different ways. But remember, we have had a military coup 4 years ago, the consequences of which are still with us. And there is a widespread sense here in Turkey that our Western allies either failed to understand what really happened on that fateful night, or they simply chose not to act in a way that will have, spoken to the sentiments and feelings of people here in Turkey in terms of actions that were taken or not taken by our Western allies in the fight against this FETÖ terrorists around the world. Again, there's a lot of frustration there. Unfortunately, many European capitals have become safe haven for PKK terrorists, for FETÖ terrorists. That includes the United States as far as FETÖ is concerned. So, these issues are out there also as sources of frustration. Some people and governments claim that Turkey has put so many journalists in prison, etc. And we've tried to explain on every occasion possible that some of these people are in prison not because of their journalism, but because of their connections and relationship with either PKK or FETÖ or other related or other organizations like DHKPC, etc. I mean, we are open to have an open conversation about all these issues. But as I said, Turkey's national security concerns need to be taken into account in that conversation.
Let me ask you about Iran. One of the things the Biden administration, incoming Biden administration, has spoken about is the interest in getting back into the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement with Iran. Would you see this as one area of where Turkey and the United States could have a greater convergence of interest post-Trump? And are there other areas like that, where you might actually find better ground with Biden than with Trump?
Well, there are a number of issues over which we disagree with Iran, like in Syria, for example, the future fate of the Assad regime, and and other sectarian issues, etc. But Iran is a major neighboring country to us, and we always believe that it's always better to engage Iran than to estrange it. And we believe constructive engagement can minimize, mitigate against any kind of negative outcomes in terms of regional policies. And we believe and we supported the JPCOA agreement. And I think it will help if the Biden administration goes back into that agreement. It will create a space for further engagement with Iran. I think that will be good. Can it happen? Will it happen? I think that's a big question, because as much as I respect President-elect Biden's statement a couple of weeks ago that he wants to go back to the JCPOA, I think that's a good sign, that's a good signal, that's a good message. But the alliance that was formed in the Gulf, Israel, UAE, Saudi Arabia, is very anti-Iran alliance that was formed. I don't think they will just sit idly and let the Biden administration move in that direction so easily, because within the U.S. political dynamics have been construed in such a way that there is just a lot of resistance. I'm sure there will be a lot of resistance to it at the Congress and other circles in the U.S. I don't think that it will be so easy, for the Biden administration to make that move, but I hope they do. It creates, believe me, more space for engagement and de-escalation in the region.
Ambassador, I'm conscious of our time. There were 68 questions have been raised. I've done my best to group some of them. There are some about China. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but in a way it takes us back to your opening remarks in a bigger picture sense about how, from a Turkish perspective, you see the rise of China, and if indeed there is a kind of growing competition in many spheres between the United States, in particular, and China, but also the potential for US-European convergence, or perhaps not, on how to deal with China. Where will Turkey stand in all of this?
Well, China is, as you said, is now a major power, no longer an emerging power. China has arrived in so many different ways. It's here, a major, second largest economy in the world, but more and more becoming a political and even up to a certain point a military power, in its own region. The Chinese call themselves the Middle Kingdom. In a sense, they always see themselves kind of in the middle of the earth or of the universe, and they are acting in that way. They are huge. The Silk Road, One Way, One Belt project, etc. These are huge issues, and I see the West trying to develop some kind of a working relationship with China, how to engage China. So such a big, huge structure. I think it will be in our joint interest, we believe, to engage China in constructive ways. Again, in trade wars, for example, are never good. President Trump tried that. It doesn't help anyone. It ends up hurting everyone. And other issues, regional issues, China and its relationship with countries that are traditionally pro-Western or have good relations with Western countries in Southeast Asia. All these issues require further engagement, a larger engagement, deeper engagement with the Chinese actors and officials. And I believe, I mean, we try, and we have good relations with China. Sometimes, differences over the treatment of Uyghurs, and we raise them with them, on these issues. But we know that China is an important player, and it requires and calls for further engagement on different fronts.
Ambassador, I'm now very conscious of our time and your schedule. Thank you once again for this. Thanks for being with us from Baku, taking time out of a very busy schedule. It's been an extraordinary conversation. You've been extremely open with us, and we're very grateful for that. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks to everyone for joining us. Let me also thank TOBB once again, and also in particular to thank my colleagues, Kadri Tashtan, TOBB Senior Fellow in Brussels, and also Annika Vollmer for making this possible, and William Stewart Webb and Zach Tarrant for making it all work. Thanks again to all of our audience for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again at GMF, and I wish you a very good and very healthy evening.